Bobby, we're actually live and
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for joining us today as we discuss achieving equality for women. What does this entail? Why should we care? And what can we do? Women's empowerment can be defined as promoting women's sense of self-worth, their ability to determine their own choices, and their right to influence a social change for themselves and others. It is closely aligned with female empowerment, a fundamental human right that's also key to achieving a more peaceful and prosperous world. In Western countries, female empowerment is often associated with specific phases of the women's rights movement in history. This movement tends to be split into three waves. The first, in the 19th and early 20th century, where suffrage was a key feature. The second wave of the 1960s included the sexual revolution and the role of women in society. Third wave, feminism is often seen as beginning in the 1990s. Women's empowerment and promoting women's rights have emerged as a part of a major global movement and are continuing to break new ground in recent years. Days like International Women's Empowerment Day are also gaining momentum. But despite a great deal of progress, women and girls continue to face discrimination and violence in every part of the world. To talk to us further on this topic, we are honored to have Yasmin Hassan with us. Yasmin Hassan is the Global Executive Director of the Equality Now, an international human rights organization which uses legal advocacy to protect and promote women and girls' rights. A feminist since age 10, she's dedicated to the cause of gender equality and believes the first step to achieving it is equal treatment under the law. She has appeared in numerous media outlets to address the global situation of women, including Al Jazeera, CNN, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. Yasmin is a native of Pakistan and authored the country's first study of domestic violence, which ultimately became Pakistan's submission to the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing in 1995. She holds a JD from Harvard Law School and is the mother of two young sons. Lastly, Yasmin was featured in Forbes 50 over 50 in 2021. A few highlights which Forbes shared. Yasmin grew up in Pakistan. Oh, I messed up. Okay, Yasmin, what did I write? Yes. And Yasmin grew up in Pakistan, and when she was 10, witnessed how a change in her country's law effectively reduced women to second-class citizens. This was a defining moment for her life's career, advocating for women and girls' rights. Yasmin Hassan is the author of the first ever study on domestic violence in Pakistan. The paper was submitted in the 1995 World Conference on Women in Beijing. In 2020, she launched the Equality in the Family campaign. It aims to repeal sex discriminatory family laws based on religion and tradition. As the world went into lockdown and gender-based violence rose, the campaign gained support from governments around the world. Before becoming Equality Now's director in 2011, Hassan served on the Council on Foreign Relations Advisory Board on Child Marriage. Yasmin, thank you so much for joining us. I know you've had a very busy and hectic week, but please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Nazia. It's wonderful to be here and it's wonderful to see you. And I see another of our friends is online, Reemi, Zareen Mirza. So hello, Reemi. So it's great to be here with old friends and to talk about stuff that affects us all as women from Pakistan. So thanks for having me.
So, Yasmin, जिस तरह हम बात करेंगे, हम आपके थोड़ा काम के बारे में बात करेंगे. So the first thing that I'm going to ask you is, can you please tell us a little bit about your career trajectory? We were together in school in Canada. Then you went to college in the United States and then law school. And I know you were a corporate law after that. What made you go into this field on women's rights? Because ये वो वाली चीज़ है जो कि I'm sure a lot of women would like to know.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And you already said, because when I was 10 years old, and this is before we knew each other, because you came to, that's when Ziaul Haq brought in what he called Islamic laws. And unfortunately, most of the Islamic laws were targeted and making women second-class citizens, right? So women couldn't sign legal contracts, women couldn't give evidence in court at the same basis as men. And that's when the Zina ordinance came in. So if a woman was actually raped, she was liable to be flogged for fornication and adultery. So this actually was a sea change in Pakistan. I don't remember Pakistan being the country it is now while I was growing up before then. And what really impacted me was like all the women from Women's Action Forum and other really took to the streets at that time, and women protested, and they were tear gassed, they were put in jail. All my mother's friends were there. And, as a child, I was like, how can this be? How can your country look as you as less than, a full citizen? So I had always had these questions in mind, and I always asked these questions. And when I got a chance to go to college, we were together in Sacred Heart, then Kinnaird College. And then when I went off to Mount Holyoke, it was a women's college. And the great thing about that was that we really studied feminism. It was very different from women's colleges in Pakistan, not that different maybe, but we got a chance to study human rights, feminism, what that means and what is possible in the world. And I got very intrigued by seeing how religions have been manipulated to make women second-class citizens. So I then went off to law school, and I studied Islamic law. And I didn't want to study Islamic law in Pakistan because I felt that wasn't an unbiased view to really look at, does Islam say all these things about women that we are hearing in Pakistan? And actually it's not true. So I did Islamic law, human rights, and then I wanted to come back to Pakistan and really work with Asma Jahangir, who had been my mentor, because I had worked with Hina and her every summer on, women's rights in Pakistan and representing women. And my father said to me that if you stay in the United States, he said, whatever you do, don't join an NGO, right? Which is what I do. He said, if you want to come to Pakistan and make a change for women, do corporate law, get, corporate clients, and have those clients come in with all their influence and all into the women's rights sphere. So my father had done something similar with environmental law and handicap rights, and he's a corporate lawyer in Pakistan. So that's why I actually really went into corporate law to get the training in mergers and acquisitions and securities law and all that. And then, 5 years into it, I ended up marrying somebody here, and it wasn't possible then to move back to Pakistan. And so at that point, I did 8 years of corporate law actually after law school. And then I got a call from the UN because at that time the Taliban had fallen in, if you remember, this is like the early 1990s and early 2000s, and the Taliban had fallen in Afghanistan. And they were looking for somebody who was an expert in Islamic law, human rights, and women's rights. And they said, could you come in and help us rewrite the legal system and, protections in Afghanistan? So I moved from like Silicon Valley and corporate law to working at the UN. I did that for 5 years. And now Equality Now was very, very close to my heart, because while I was in law school and while I was doing the study of domestic violence in Pakistan, these lawyers from Equality Now, the organization was founded in 1992. And they got in touch with me right after that because I was doing the domestic violence study in Pakistan. And so we started collaborating. And so I'd always worked with them. And so, coming to Equality Now was kind of like coming home, and I know and I'll tell you a little bit more about our work, but this is a long answer to your question. I do think very clearly from all that I've studied and learned is that the equality of women is the basis of solving most of the world's problems, whether that is peace or security, whether that is development, whether that's climate change, and that might surprise you. But the keys to all this are women's equality, and that's what we work on.
Excellent. Thank you, Yasmin. Can you talk a little bit about the work of Equality Now? What are your areas of focus and why have you chosen these?
Yeah. It's interesting because when we started off, we are like, okay, what needs to get done in women's rights? The first thing, Nazia, and this is, I'm talking about 1993 or 92, women's rights were not considered international human rights. So the big human rights organizations in the world, which was like Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International, were looking at like freedom of speech, political prisoners, basically anything that happened to men was considered human rights, and it was elevated to the international frame. And whatever happened to women was seen as culture. right? And so it was like a culture ki baat hai, and governments can deal with it on its own. So one of our founders was from Amnesty International, and she tells this story that she kept getting all these women from Africa calling her and saying female genital mutilation, which is a huge cultural practice, impacts 3 million girls a year. And so she would take it up the ranks at Amnesty, and they say this is a cultural practice, and why should we care about this? It's not a human rights issue. Similarly, sex trafficking at that time, which is a $99 billion business in the world, was not seen as a human rights concern. It was seen as maybe transnational crime, like drug crime and all. And we were like, women are 99% of the victims of sex trafficking, right? So, and thirdly, we had all sorts of domestic violence, okay? I was here in the United States, I was in law school. We didn't have a single domestic violence law. We did the first center on domestic violence because domestic violence was just seen as life. This is what happens. It's like, and you get mediators to like mediate, and women were dying. So we really said that we want to bring women's rights squarely into the human rights field. And why is that important? Because we also know that women's rights groups all around the world are the most marginalized, right? Log kehte hain, hi, she has a bee up her bonnet, ye to aise hi sari family life kharab kar rahe hain, aur ye wo. So they are most marginalized. The governments don't take them seriously. You need to bring this work into international human rights to elevate the issue and hold these governments to account. Ki aap kya kar rahe hain, So one of the first things we did as Equality Now is actually we brought an action against UNICEF. It was interesting because UNICEF is the biggest child protection agency in the world, yet they had $170,000 around the world that they were dedicating to FGM, which impacts 3 million girls a year, every single year, right? So we created a campaign for everybody to write into UNICEF to say, what is this? You're not treating this properly. And so that work and a whole lot of other work since then has led to female genital mutilation being recognized as a human rights violation. And now almost every practicing country has banned this practice -3 that are all in Africa, So those are the kind of things we wanted to do. The second thing was women were getting raped in war all around the world. And this was seen, even if you read the Quran, okay, in the Quran, this is seen as a consequence of war. कि आपने ये किसी चीज को conquer किया, फिर उधर की औरतों को आपने slaves की तरह बांटा and all this kind of stuff, right? So the rape as war has been seen as a consequence of war and not as a weapon of war. And we had the Bosnian war that happened where Muslim women were being raped as a systematic, way of impregnating these women with Croatian, Serbian babies and all that. So we created the first war crimes tribunal for Yugoslavia, and we wanted to get rape recognized as a weapon of war, which makes it an international war crime. And that didn't happen in Yugoslavia, but it happened in Rwanda. And the person who wrote that opinion was one of the founders of Equality Now, Navi Pillay. She is a South African jurist. So, those were some of the early days stuff, and we were very, very excited. And I worked with Equality Now on this. And we've continued to figure out that while women's empowerment there's so much to be done. What we do is really focus on the laws, because the laws is what governments are accountable for, right? So our belief is that an essential first step to women's equality is to get the governments to recognize that they're equal and to enforce their laws on equality. So for that reason, we have 4 main program areas. One of them is legal equality, which doesn't, it's not surprising, but really what we did there is look at all the laws in the world that on the books treat men and women differently. Yeah. So there were 4 main categories. Okay. One was personal status. And I talked a little bit about Pakistan laws, which women couldn't give evidence. Women can't pass their nationality to their husbands or their children. Women can't travel without consent of, male guardian or something. So there were all those personal status laws. Then there were economic status laws, like women can't work at certain hours, they can't work in certain jobs, they can't be in certain educational fields and all that. So those all women couldn't inherit, they couldn't own property if they were married, so those kind of laws. The third kind of laws were laws related to family law, like your status in the family. So women couldn't get married of their own volition. They couldn't divorce people. They didn't have rights to custody of children, right? They didn't have, there were wife obedience laws. They still exist in a lot of places. And there were husbands were heads of households. So there were those kind of laws. And then lastly, these were actually quite shocking to me. There were laws that recognized that men could commit violence against women and go free. So there were lots of laws in places which allowed domestic violence. Nigeria still has that kind of law. There were laws that allowed marital rape. So they would have a definition of rape, and they would exempt, if you're married to the person you're raping, it's not rape. So there's those, and then there were laws on honor crimes saying that if a man finds like his female relative in suspicious circumstances and he kills her, he's not. So we put the first world report on these kind of laws on, we produced the first report in 1999, launched it in 2000. And since then there's been a sea change, and this has become a primary goal of the UN and the World Bank and all this, and the driver of us was like this tiny organization, Equality Now, so that's our first program area. And the other three really have to do with violence against women, because I really believe violence against women is the driver. So there's inequality and then there's violence. So we deal with ending sexual violence, and here we're really looking at access to justice, because what happens with, even if you have laws against sexual violence, if women can't access justice, and the systems are so corrupt that they will never access justice, you can't make that change, right? So sexual violence, and here we really focus on adolescent girls, because I was talking about FGM previously, but a lot of forms of violence against women happen to girls. Child marriage, FGM, trafficking, those are all happening to girls. So that's one, and I'll talk about it if anybody has questions later. Second one was ending sex trafficking, because sex trafficking, and again, I talked to you about it, was it's a transnational crime, and it's like within border sex trafficking and then across borders. And Pakistan, this is a very rife topic for Pakistan, and in Pakistan, what we've seen is like there is a lot of internal rural to city and city to city sex trafficking, which is not even recognized under the law, because the law looks at sex trafficking as Pakistan to other countries, or other. So that's another program area we work in. And the third one is ending harmful practices. And by harmful practices, I mean things like child marriage, female genital mutilation, honor crimes. And these are things that are sanctioned by custom, tradition, or religion. And so you have to change these kind of practices, you have to change hearts and minds and cultures in addition to changing the law. But changing that law is the first step. So we really focused on these areas because we said the law really needs to, number one, be equal for women. Number two, address all forms of violence against women. And then the governments have to implement those laws so we can actually achieve legal equality. And that in a nutshell is the work, And well, I should also point out, we have presence in Kenya, Nairobi, and that's where we do all the Africa work. We have an office in Beirut where we do all the Middle Eastern work. We have an office in the UK, and all the Asian and Eurasian work is done through there. And from the US, we do North America and South America. And we have a presence now in India, Georgia, Russia, Netherlands. So we've become a dispersed organization, but we really work with grassroots organization on the ground in these areas to see, and this is important because we are not an organization that comes into a country and tells people what to do, which I think is one of the worst models for development or anything. We really go into a country and we ask the women's rights groups there, what is the problems that you're grappling with and how can the international community help you? And so we work with them to tailor an approach that actually works for their country and that could be, useful and advance the agenda. Anyways, that's in a nutshell.
That's impressive. Thank you very much. Yasmin, what particular have you worked on in Pakistan?
Pakistan's been a difficult country because I'm from there and it's been hard to work in Pakistan. But one of the first things that we did in Pakistan was work on the rape laws. When I started off, telling you that when I was a child, the case of all these cases of women being put in jail for being raped, it really, I couldn't sleep at night because of those cases. And what Pakistan had done in 1979 was we didn't have rape laws. Like our rape statute was under the Dood Ordinance, which is morality, right? So what would happen is that women actually had to prove that they were raped, and the proof was 4 male Muslim witnesses or some crazy thing, of good repute. Can you imagine if like 4 good repute men are watching your rape, then they are obviously
exactly
repute, so it was almost impossible. So the first task was bringing rape out of the Hudud ordinance into the penal code like normal countries do, and then getting that rape law to be strengthened. And I think we did a lot of work, even on the issue of incest in Pakistan, which nobody recognizes, and it's still not recognized by law. So that was one of the things, and I think it's a success story, even though in terms of getting the law correct, even though implementation of that law leaves a lot to be desired. And one of the second things we did is honor crime laws. Again, in Pakistan, we have Islamic systems. So there's a system of qisas and diyat, which means that when somebody commits a crime, it's a crime against the family and not a crime against the state. So under the qisas and diyat laws, the family can forgive the perpetrator. So if you rape somebody, the family can decide to forgive. If you murder somebody. Now in honor crime cases, the family was the same. So it's your family who murdered you, and then the family would forgive you. Right. So usually, and so that was a really, really bad outcome, which basically meant we didn't have a law against honor crime. So we worked with Shamin Obaid Chinoy, the film A Girl in the River, and that led to the change of the law where now honor crime is a crime against the state. So family can't forgive. Now, again, we are still having issues with how that law is implemented, and that goes into the issue of culture, right? And how do you change culture, and how do you end corruption in law enforcement, and how do you do better implementation? But those were, in recent years, the two big campaigns that we did work on in Pakistan.
Thank you very much. We have a question from one of our members. Soraya, do you want to unmute and ask Yasmin, please?
Assalamu alaikum, Yasmin.
Hi.
It is wonderful what you're doing. It's just, it's empowering just listening to you. So my question is, what constitutes a marital rape?
If you are raped in marriage, if you don't, a general definition of rape is like, it's an act that requires, sex is an act that requires consent of two parties. So if there is a lack of consent, like the most restrictive definitions of rape are if you have been forced and beaten into it, and then, clearly against your will, you've been raped. The better definitions of rapes are where your consent has been ascertained. So both, so if you're drunk and you're passed out and then you have sex, that is rape. Or if somebody has said no and then it still continues, that is rape, right? So if that kind of stuff happens to a woman who is married to the man, that should still count as a rape, and it should be part of the domestic violence law and the rape law, and not be, there shouldn't be an exception saying a man actually cannot rape his wife, which was the case in many, many countries of the world. And now that tide is changing, turning. Does that answer you, or did you have?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think what we need is a clarity on, sometimes there's emotional pressure. So there's no consent, but there's such emotional pressure, especially in our communities, that they say the woman cannot say no to her husband whenever he desires, or his need has to be fulfilled. That this is the kind of cultural norms that I've seen, that I've experienced. Many women said that, they were going to do tubalization, tube time, because they could not keep their husbands off, or they could not get their husbands to cooperate with them. And this was getting on. And I've seen this women, it was a big movement where they went and had this done because they did not want to keep producing babies, because they could not get their husband to understand. And if a woman says no, it becomes a big hero.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is where the issue becomes like, can legal change? So you need two things. You need a legal change and you need a social change, right? And my belief is that starting with legal change can very often lead to the social change. Because if marital rape is not against the law, and the culture all supports this, what you're saying, that a man has a right to, then you're never going to get a change, right? But if you change the law, initially, it's not going to work because women will not know the law. You can't implement the law because there's a culture. But little by little, that change will come. And so when governments, I get very pissed off to say, when you go to governments, and there generally are governments, and they say, nahin ji, bibi, thoda time lagta hai, logon ko change hona hai. Maine kaha, but aapko to time nahi lagta na. Aapne to law change karna hai, aur aapne thoda implement karna hai. Aur phir, because you see that the government is behind that, the social change can come. Like it's little at a time, but from the time I was growing up to now, there is a difference. If you see the younger population, they're talking about very different things, and they are much more empowered than we were as young girls to even challenge a lot of the stuff. So the change does happen, but I was like, how does cultural change happen? How does social change happen? And I always argue that the legal change and the government backing women's rights to equality has to come first. And, like our government so far has not backed any such, our government, particularly the current one, with controversial comments on like women who were raped, their dress, why were they driving at night and all that it shows, it actually bolsters the culture that you're talking about right now, right?
100%.
So.
एक और बात, Yasmin, the thing is that, you and I spoke about a couple of weeks back, the things that happen in even very sheltered families. The shame is, chahe wo ladkon ke saath, like, you and I spoke about incest, we talk about, knocker or, ye बच्चियों के साथ, बच्चों के साथ, mostly it's like कि बात नहीं करनी, कोई cousin घर में आ गया, बात नहीं करनी है. So the shame is always put on the children. You're not supposed to talk about it. And even the mother sometimes, even the knocker and all that, and you and I shared some stories and stuff. So I don't know, because sometimes, how to empower the mothers have to understand, what do you say about that? Why is it like that even now?
See, it's based on, like in Pakistan, it's the concept of honor. So like sex outside of marriage or sex of any kind within the family, it's associated with the honor of the family, and the shame is on the person who has experienced it, right? And that's huge, that stigma and shame is a huge barrier to moving anything forward, right? And one of the things when we talked, Nazia, it was the issue of, in Pakistan is one of the only countries in the world that does not have a law against incest. Even in the child protection statute or the criminal code, it doesn't, there's nothing that says that the child can be assaulted by somebody in the family, right? And when we go and talk to the police and all, they're like, haan ji, aap rape law ke andar karen. But I will tell you the experience in Pakistan, because we started following what was happening in Pakistan. Anytime a girl, usually it's a young girl, sometimes a young boy, and they actually are able to even take the case to the police to register an FIR, right? For an FIR, for people who don't know, is the first information report that starts a criminal proceeding. So the police wale hain, wo kehte hain ki bibi, aap jhoot bol rahi hain, और ये आपकी माँ आपके बाप को छोड़ रही होगी, आप बदला लेने की कोशिश कर रही हैं, या आपका कोई बॉयफ्रेंड है और आप उसके साथ, और अब आप अपने बाप को ब्लेम कर रही हैं, तो वो FIR ही नहीं कटाते, बिकॉज कहते हैं पॉसिबल ही नहीं है. सो आज was like, एक लॉ में अगर आप एक सेक्शन डालेंगे, दिस इज लाइक अ हायर पेनल्टी देन रेप, बिकॉज इट्स विद इन द फैमिली एंड ऑल दिस, और बच्चों के साथ हो रहा है. There's no buy-in in Pakistan because of the Islamic groups and like parliament and all this that could not move. And like we gave them examples of Malaysia, Turkey, other Muslim countries, and all of them have provisions of interest, either under child protection or under penal laws and all that kind of stuff. We still don't have that. So Pakistan, it's a huge, even coming forward, we took a case actually, and this could be interesting. We took a case, this girl who I will call Mariam, it's not her real name. And I met her while I was in Pakistan, and I went to the offices of War Against Rape, which is an amazing organization in Pakistan, which is fighting very hard battles, and this girl came in with her uncle, and she had been raped by her father in Pakistan. They lived, close to Shalimar Gardens and all that. And they didn't know what to do, because the mother had been a victim of domestic violence, left the father. The father then started raping this young girl, 15 years old. And uski teacher ne usko bhagwaya, like teacher ko bataya, teacher called the mother took her, and the family was very poor. So we talked to these people, and I explained to them, I said, listen, there's no law in Pakistan. We can get you a lawyer and we can fight this to try to get a law. But I want to tell you that you are going to get killed by the legal system, because सारे आपके question करेंगे कि आपके motivations क्या थे, ये. So I said, आप सोच रहे हैं. We were paying for her psychological counseling and all that kind of stuff. And this young girl said to me, if he was my father, he wouldn't have done this to me, and I want justice, right? So then we got a law firm in Pakistan, which is one of the premier law firms. And we had this War Against Rape and Equality Now, and we took this case through the legal system. And we, at every step of the way, we looked at what were the barriers. You know, पहले पुलिस का barrier था कि वो लिख नहीं रहे थे. फिर जब हमने pressure डाला तो वो FIR कट गई. But फिर हमने सोचा कि prosecutor bribe हो गया. The father had money, he had a welding business. उसने and prosecutor was quietly going to drop this case. And once the case is dropped, then you can't do anything about it.
Exactly.
Ran over, and we have had equality now. And we said, we are an international organization. We are watching this. So then they changed the prosecutor. Prosecutor ठीक लगा. फिर prosecutor का कोई law ही नहीं पता थे. They said, oh, and you know, under 16, it's statutory rape. So you don't have to prove consent or lack of consent or anything. But the prosecutor themselves didn't. So we had our research team in England doing research of all Commonwealth countries and how do you apply this law and all that. Then जब हम कोर्ट पहुंचे तो कोर्ट में उसकी माँ इतनी गरीब, वो बच्ची इतनी गरीब, उनको हम पिक करके लाते थे और वो तारीख पड़ जाती थी because the father's lawyers would say नहीं नहीं continuance. So उनकी, you know, the mother was a working woman and all this, you know, she was as a healthcare provider and all this. So it was impossible. इतनी उनके पैसे ज़ाया हो रहे थे और time ज़ाया हो रहा था. And then in the court waiting room, this girl had to sit right next to the father who would also be there. Then to go into the kacheri, उसके साथ खड़े होके आपके बाप ने आपके साथ किया, बाप साथ खड़ा हुआ, you know. So we noted all these and then we put in a dossier of like, what do you need for victims of sexual violence in Pakistan? We convened groups from all the provinces. We convened judges, we convened prosecutors, police people, and say, what are the changes we have to do in these kind of laws and legal procedures? Because it's not just the law. Yeah. So law आपका ठीक भी हो, आपका legal procedure ऐसा हो कि बच्ची तो कभी जज के पास पहुंच ही ना सके और जज की मेंटालिटी ऐसी है कि आप उसको रेप करें, तो it's actually more damaging for this kid to go through a legal process than even the rape itself, right? So those are the things that we had to fix, and we did a big report, and you know the judiciary took it seriously, and now there is a time limit. So आपका अगर rape जब report हुआ है to conclusion, I believe it's 6 months now, and it has to be speedy trial. You can have child victims testifying separately just to the judge and not in court and all that. So all those procedures, you know, it's a little bit at a time, but आपको जब पता चले कि कितने huge barriers हैं. So you have to take it one step at a time to actually, you know, have a thing of justice. In that case in particular, and if people are interested, the guy got the death penalty.
Yes.
That was after, but we as a human rights organization are against the death penalty, right? So then we are like, what do we do? But then Pakistani groups all celebrating. So we were like, listen, you know, appeal pe jab jayega, so we are going to ask for life imprisonment and not death penalty. But the guy just died in jail. So it never even went to appeal. And we didn't set a precedent because, you know, if you know law, precedent is only set by a high court decision. This was a magistrate court decision. So our goal was to set a high court level decision, a precedent, which will then inform other cases. And that will then also lead to a change of law. So we didn't get that. But, you know, this girl is fine. She's married. She has a child now. And, you know, I keep in touch with her. So those are the kind of, I mean, this was just an example of like the kind of work you have to do, and you have to involve local lawyers, local NGOs, in, you know, just to change this one thing for one girl, which we hope will have a bigger sea change for all the girls, you know?
Wow. Thank you very much, Yasmin. What do you think are big drivers of change? And, you know, we're a small organization. We as women, or we as a small organization, how do you think we can help to make a difference?
You know, I seriously believe, Nazia, that everybody can make a difference. And there's no thing that you do that is too small. Because if you look at the problem, it seems unsurmountable. Or फिर हम कहते हैं, हाय, क्या करें? और सिर्फ बैठ के, you know, इतने problems, and like people go and coffee party and they gossip about these kind of things. I was like, okay, I used to always get very upset when my mother's friends used to come home. All these things, and like, I was like, अगर आप बातें ना करें, आप थोड़ा सा कुछ करें, तो छोटे-छोटी चीजें बन के, you know, you at least raise your voice. That's the first thing you can do. Because I just think gossiping about this kind of stuff is not useful. And I have uska ye hua and all this, you add to the problem with this. So everybody has a network and everybody has a sphere of influence. And aapka sphere of influence can be as little as your family, or it can be as big as, you know, the world, right? So figure out what your sphere of influence is. And even if it is changing the way you talk about certain things and tolerating kind of nonsense talk that a lot of people do, you know, like she was saying that, you know, domestic violence or marital rape or kisi ki koi choice nahi hai. why don't you question, like aisi baat aapki family mein bhi ho, to people, women, it's on us to like question these things and not go along with it. So that's what I'm saying. There's no thing that is too small. It takes all of us to make a change. So then if you're working as a reporter, I would say you should report on these issues in a way. Like one of the barriers that we faced is how the media reported on issues of violence against women, sexual harassment and all that. And it was all on the women and how she dressed and how she walked and did she go out to parties. You change the way that you look at that issue. And that is very powerful. We also do, training of reporters where needed. If you are creating television shows, you have to have in the back of your mind, because television shows, as we discussed previously, I feel are the drivers of social change, especially things that people are watching for enjoyment. Like a lot of people don't watch things on issues because it's like too heavy. But if you're doing that, you have to bring in the right kind of people and create the right characters with the right kind of messaging that doesn't seem like messaging, right? Because the minute people think something is messaging, they are not going to watch it. Some of the biggest changes that I've seen here in this country, in the US, has been through Hollywood. Like, and I'll give you an example, is the issue of marriage equality. Okay, in the 1990s, gay marriage, that nobody could have even thought of such a thing, right? So whether you're for it or against it, it was brilliant how they changed the tide from angry people at the gay pride march saying we are here and we are in your face to we are just like you, we are family and the same values and we want the same things. And they did that through shows like Will and Grace and Modern Family, So you need to have allies in all these places, like news media, big media, just general families and workplaces, right? Like somebody had asked a question, I know you had sent them to me, about women in the workplace and sexual harassment. I was like, yes, I mean, the problem I see in our country is that nobody will back up. If somebody gets harassed in the workplaces and all of us join them and all of us do not tolerate it, that becomes this force, right? Where the one person alone can be a troublemaker and thrown out of a job. So I think that you have to really examine how are you feeding into the same stereotypes and fostering a culture that you don't agree with. So I don't know, long-winded, it's probably not as clear an answer as you would have wanted. But
I get that. बिल्कुल सही बात है कि हर कोई, every one of us can make a difference.
Yeah.
If I'm right, Yasmin, Pakistan ranks 151 out of 153 countries on the Global Gender Gap Index. What role can people like us play to try and change that? It's the same thing. For example, you look at the TV dramas, female characters are so regressive. Where are we headed? And in your opinion, do you think there is hope for a change?
There's always hope for a change. Otherwise, we might as well commit suicide, right?
Exactly.
There's always hope for a change. And this is what people are like, oh, Toshiba is here. Hi, Toshiba. There's always hope for a change, because without change, like you're static and then there's no point in going on anyways, right? And people have to believe is that they are agents of change. And I do want to talk about Pakistan being so low on the gender equality index. Like at one point, it was the third last country and the only two people below us was like Chad and Nigeria, I believe, right? So this is like shameful, okay? And where Pakistan has gone from being a country, from the time of independence, we had so much hope for this country and all this, to now, I do believe on the irresponsible and regressive use of Islam and the fact that governments have not been able to stand up to a very Wahhabi form of religion. And again, that has its roots in 1979, because we had the Iran revolution and that was the Shia revolution. And then the Saudi Arabia came in and said, we want to do a Sunni one and we have to spread Wahhabism. And we got a leader who was like, had the ear of Saudi Arabia, and that's where we've gone. And if you look at all the countries at the bottom of the gender inequality index, they happen to be Muslim countries, which is shameful, right?
Absolutely.
That's why one of the biggest campaigns we've launched this last year, which was 25 years after Beijing, was the campaign for equality in family law. Because I was talking to you previously about that, when we had legal inequality and violence against women or personal status, economic status, where we've seen the least change in the last 25 years is in family law. And why is that the case? Because family law is influenced by religion, whether it's Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Islam, right? Most family law codes in countries such as ours are written, and the governments are loath to address that discrimination because they don't want to run afoul of religious leaders. And so, I'll tell you CEDAW, if people know, CEDAW is the Treaty on Women's Rights, the global treaty. There are only 4 countries in the world that have not ratified it. Everybody's ratified it. US has not ratified it, though. That's one of the countries that has not ratified it. But it's the bill of, it has 16 articles on women, right? The most reservations, and reservations are countries signing the treaty saying, okay, we agree to equality, but we have reservations based on. This treaty has Article 16 of CEDAW is about equality in the family. And that article has the most reservations of any article in any human rights treaty, of all the treaties, right? And most of those reservations are on religion and tradition. So that is our problem right now, is dealing with religion and tradition and getting countries to, governments to be brave enough to take that on. Because as long as, my thing is, as long as you have inequality in the family and a girl is less than a boy at the basic level of society, you can educate them up the wazoo, you can do this, they're not going to reach their full potential. It's just not going to happen, So I think now the time is for, why are all the Muslim countries at the bottom of the gender inequality index, including ours? And I really believe that is one of the driving forces. You have to change the people's impression of women, and you have to take on culture and tradition and religion. You have to get equality in the family, and then, it's a little bit at a time, but it all, takes us to the next level.
Absolutely. Abhi, Yasmin, would Sindh government ne, there was a law, I think, where women could not work at in night shifts, and now they have amended that. But people are saying that although the move is welcome, it will lead to more issues for women, for harassment, and coercion will increase. What do you think?
I think they're wrong. I mean, it's just like, basically these were some of the laws that we picked up, right? Like I told you, in 1999, we did the first coalition of laws that discriminate against women in the workforce. And one of them was women weren't allowed to work at night, and women weren't allowed to work in certain jobs. And every government we talked to, they said, this is for the protection of the women, right? So I was okay, it might be for the protection of the women, but these women, should the choice not be left to the women, and should the employer not have the liability or the accountability to create a safe space for women when they hire them? So like just banning women, and I'll give you an example. They had the same law in France, okay? And in France, this is when I worked in a law firm, and women were not allowed to work after 6 p.m. And so all the women from my law firm wanted to work in France because the guys would be working, and we had to like leave the office at 6 o'clock. But what that led to is women weren't making partners. They couldn't, because they were not putting in the hours that were required, and you're not giving women the choice. A lot of women had to then go. So all these laws that are supposed to be for protection of women and giving women more time end up hurting women. And so even if, and we had Pakistan, the issue of the Bhatta kiln workers, which was also a place where women were working very long hours, and they were then being raped and all this kind of stuff. So rather than banning people from the workplace as a way of protecting them, you need to make sure that the workplace is safe and it's harassment free. And that's when sexual harassment laws come in and policies come in, and the companies have to lead by example, and the government, if they do not, then the government has to hold them to account, right? So it's a lot of work. And I know when the person who asked that question, initially, the women who are the front runners, right? There are always people who are test cases, will have a hard time. And unfortunately, that is on our backs, some people have to lead the way, and they have to bring the test cases, and that makes it better for other people going forward.
Thank you very much. Yasmin, what advice can you give young Pakistani women who want to get into this field?
To the human rights field.
Yes, the human rights field.
I would say just educate yourself. Like, you can do this thing. Living in Pakistan, I think you have to make a career where you are noticed. I don't know if an NGO career, like same thing as what my father said to me, right? You're working in Pakistan, you first have to have the influence and the people with influence behind you. I would encourage people to get careers in law or like accounting or business or whatever the careers, and then have women's rights as the thing that they do on the side, because we need all that expertise that comes from other fields in the women's rights field. And to the extent that this is your passion and this is what you want to do, start your own NGO or join an NGO and make sure that there's a lot of global learning that there is in this field. And very often in Pakistan, people get so stuck on, but this is exactly what's happening in my country and all this stuff is inapplicable, जो आप हमें बता रहे हैं. तो मैं कहती हूँ थोड़ा सा आप खोद के देखो, because it is all applicable, because every country was in this place and then we moved them along. And some examples are, relevant and others are not, but I think educate yourself. I think you should build a career in whichever, economics, medicine, whatever, and do women's rights on the side. If you are going into this field, then eyes and ears open, have global connections, and really, listen to the women on the ground, because they know the problems that they're facing. And then we can help you figure out what are the solutions that are very particular to Pakistan, because every country, every context is different. This is why model laws don't work, right? Every law has to be based on a context. I'll give you a very interesting example. I went once to Pakistan in the summer, and the Austrian domestic violence law had always been seen as the model law. So the UN was promoting it, model law on domestic violence. And this law basically said that if the police suspect that a woman is being battered, they have the authority to enter that house and expel the husband, right? And so this was being hailed, and the police. So I came to Pakistan, and one of my friends who's a parliamentarian, she said, "Itna kharab law Pakistan mein aaya hai. Itna kharab, or this is being debated now." And I was like, what is the law? And it turned out somebody had introduced the Austrian domestic violence law in Pakistan. And people are saying, hey, police itni kharab. We have documented studies of police abuse of women. It's worse, almost as bad, if not worse, than the husbands and families abuse. So they're saying now police will have the authority to come into any house and do whatever they want. And this is a nightmare for Pakistan. And my thing is, you can't bring an Austrian law and you plop it into Pakistan, assuming that everything works the same as in Austria. So I think that you young people have to know that everything is within a context, and you have to be savvy enough to know what the context is, what can you create, and how can you get global attention and help for your solutions.
Somebody just texted me a question, and they said that, can you please, guide us which NGOs are to support in Pakistan that are really helping women and children?
There are so many, I'm the wrong person to. We have worked with Shirkat Gah, with Aurat Foundation, which are Bidari, which was doing counseling for women. Sahil was working on children's rights, war against rape. But NGOs crop up all the time. And then there's Kashyap Foundation, which is doing empowerment of women through micro loans and all that. There's a lot. I think you should look through whatever area you're interested in. And if you see that an organization doesn't exist, you should create your own. We need more organizations doing stuff and more voices in this. I know there's another organization that does cyber security stuff. Nigat Dad does it. It's about online exploitation and what is happening, because with this whole social media, there's all new forms of violence, which the laws are completely ill-equipped to deal with. What do you do when there's revenge porn, or people post pictures of you, or all that kind of stuff? Then we have issues there happening where in the Me Too movement, if somebody starts posting online that somebody raped them or somebody harassed them, they get slammed with defamation lawsuits. So there's a whole new areas of law that are coming up, that young people need to take up and take on.
Okay, thank you very much, Yasmin. We have another member, Sabah. You want to ask Yasmin your question, please?
Hello, Yasmin. My name is Sabah Mahmood, and I have a question. We do hear a lot of bad images about people who are working with these women, that ye aurtein kharab hain, women march kharab hai. So, I mean, as a third party who is never involved in these issues, there are a lot of issues for the women and children, but still we had bad things about the NGOs who are helping these girls for the betterment of their lives. So there's a lot of trust issue. So how do we know if whatever bills are passing is actually helping these marginalized people or of the society?
Well, the first part of your question was interesting because you said ye auratein kharab hain, or ye organizations, like, how do you know that? This is the biggest problem that we have is women attack other women, right? And gossip starts. And so what? Like, I mean, I work with women in the red light area in Pakistan, right? And unko sab kehte hain auratein kharab hain. And mere point of view se wo auratein bahut majboor hain, mostly trafficking victims hain, and they have been born into prostitution, right? So to me, it's like not an issue of wo auratein kharab hain. I think that any organization that is trying to do something, if an organization is corrupt, right? Like, to me, those are the organizations that are kharab, that are taking money, usually from Western, or, and they're not spending the money and using it to enrich themselves. Otherwise, I don't believe there's any such thing as auratein kharab hain, right? It's a mental attitude that I would just challenge. Because a lot of women who, initially it was women who wanted divorces and they were domestic violence victims, और लोग कहते थे ये औरतें खराब हैं. फिर जो औरतें अपनी मर्जी से शादी करना चाहती थी, वो भी औरतें खराब हैं. फिर जो औरतें, so कौन, I'm just challenging the question, like, कौन औरतें खराब हैं और आप क्यों ऐसे किसी के औरत के बारे में सोच भी रहे हो? Because you don't know the situation of these women and what led them to where they are. So our thing is we support all women, and when women come to us with stories, our thing is we believe them, because the worst things that I've heard and which people would not believe have actually happened to women. And main thing is people don't believe them and they always doubt them. So I would just try to stay away from that if possible. And then I would say, in terms of organizations, you have to figure out, are these, real organizations? Are you looking at their financial statements? How do you know what is the work that they're doing? Are you questioning them? Are you looking at their website and what is the proof? But I would discourage people, organizations, it's so hard in Pakistan to do this work. And if people in society start challenging you and saying these things about you, I would just counter it.
Thank you. So Rini is not feeling well, so she has a question. Rini ka bada gala kharab hua hai.
No, Rini, you have to ask yourself.
I asked her, Rini bolna hai? Hello, Rini.
Rini
Okay.
can't speak, okay.
Yeah, she's
Okay,
really,
now.
she's like, no.
मैंने Nazi, Noreen here, Yasmin.
Okay.
Hi,
no,
Nazi.
Yasmin, sorry, I can barely talk today. I have a very bad cold, so
Okay.
I won't be able to say it. Sorry.
Okay, let me,
I can text.
Nadine, let me ask Rini's question and then you can ask yours.
Okay.
So Rini asked, so Yasmin, if you were in charge to make women empowerment, how would you make it a better place to work?
What do you mean?
What would you do to make women empowerment a better place to work?
Women, what does that mean? Like women's NGOs? Is this a question about how would you make NGOs that are working on women's issues a better place to work?
I
Or
guess.
general workplace a better place to work?
Yes.
Which of the two, Rini? You have to specify.
Exactly what you said. She said ki jo usne bola hai wo, yes.
Okay,
The
so
first-
women's NGOs, I mean, I'll tell you one thing. They are the least resourced of any NGOs. Okay, we just have been doing a study. 1.6% of global resources for all areas go to women's rights, and a very 1.6%, right? So the most women's rights NGOs that are there are based on people working for very low salary or almost no salary, because funders are not putting money into that. You know, at the national level, there's no funding for these organizations. I was really hoping that we could do something in Pakistan where Zakat funds or something go for women's empowerment. Like, so, you know, you have people who are working in these. Unfortunately, most of the organizations are still seeking foreign funding from your Soros Foundation and all that. And they are also coming out of the women's rights thing. So the issue is, do women's rights organizations really have the resources to hire US staff? I remember in Pakistan, I volunteered all my time because there was no money. These were not careers you could have. This was something you could do on the side because you really cared about it, right? So I would say one of the first things is, to me, and I have not been able to solve that, how do we get our own country people to prioritize this issue? Because agar aap Pakistan mein dekhein philanthropy, usually people are philanthropic. They give to education, they give to hospitals. And usually people like their names on buildings, you know, that's what people give to.
Right.
They're like, but so how can we create something where people actually, that this work is really important work, and this work is really important work for women. And we have amazing advocates who are doing this night and day in Pakistan without any compensation, right? So can we create some kind of way to have Pakistanis give to this kind of work in Pakistan, even if it's Pakistani women, right? So that would be the first thing. To make a women's rights organization a good place to work, they have to have resources. So please help create resources for these people. Because there aren't any. Internationally, they're not. And in Pakistan, they're certainly not. And I haven't solved that question. And I would love one of the people on this call. I see Misbah is also here. Hello, Misbah and Noreen. You guys have to do this. It's like,
Thank you,
Right.
Yasmin.
Thanks. Hi, how are you? How are you? It's been so long.
it has.
Amazing work you do, by the way. I've been following you kind of now and then when I see you on LinkedIn. Bahut Mubarak. I hear you got into the Forbes something or other, and we are so proud of you, Yasmin. So proud of you, truly.
Thank you.
Noreen, you want to ask your question now?
Yes, sorry. Yasmin, again, we can talk for a long time on these issues, and but carrying on what you were just talking about in terms of resources and women issues being in terms of ratio of the funding that they get. It's not just about funding, getting that funding from the foreign sources, because that in itself is a huge bureaucracy to go through these days. In the last few years, what the government has put in.
Yeah.
एक तो वो बहुत element है उसका, that obviously. And then the other thing is this, and you already spoke about that, the mindset. अब आप कुछ भी issues पे काम करने की कोशिश करते हो, तो you're being pointed out as, oh ये तो NGO आ गए, या तो ये NGO mindset से आप बात करते हो. Anyways, coming back to like someone like me who works a lot with the business organizations, and helping them navigate through some of these issues, which unfortunately, but in some ways fortunately as well, are brought to their notice, because I work in the garment and the textile sector, and a lot of these brands through their codes of conducts and sustainability focused images that they want to obviously are protective of in the world that they sell. And then they go back to their suppliers and have them work on these issues. So in a way, I find that at least it's a positive way of taking things forward. At least if they are pushed, then they are huge business organizations, like you have Al-Karam, Crescent, you have Artistic, you have Nishat, and all these, huge employers who are now in the last few years trying to induct more women in their workforce. Or usme obviously different elements hain, the women who work at the lowest tier, like on the production floor, sewing operators. Then you have middle management, executive leadership team mein to women hai hi nahi. Hardly 1%, at best 2%, not more than that. अच्छा, अब जब हम लोग business organizations के साथ काम करते हैं, someone like me, we're trying to make them think about these issues as an organization. So what do you do? The kind of policies you have in place, un policies ko aap with a gender lens, how do you enhance them? How do you make them think about equal pay issues? How do you, so as an organization, people in the HR or finance would say, nahi, hum to discriminate nahi karte, humne to kabhi aurat ki, usko, there's no company policy on, harassment ke upar, this and that. So one would tell them or try and, say it is not per se that individually, you're trying to point out, oh, this person is like that. But as an organization, you have to think about these things, and you have to make your workplace more inclusive, more, diverse. And when you do that, you see, because as a society, you already have this issue. So what do you do as an organization where when people come to your workplace, those issues, you have consciously thought of them and you try and address them. So maybe in some ways you have to give, for example, although at times initially you would hate that, but koi aap quota kar dete ho ki minimum ratio of women you would induct or hire, like, whatever, 20%, 30%. Acha, jab wo let's suppose उस पे agree कर देते हैं. So, but when you put those policies into practice, because at the end of the day, it's people who are the executors. तो वहाँ पे फिर ये debates चलती हैं कि, you know, you've giving them favor. Women sometimes use these as an advantage. Some of them do not deserve it. So, so some ways you try and you make that one step forward in terms of a change in the policy, but when you try and implement that policy, you come back to the same point. So we do, of course, go back and you know, try and push this thing forward, but now kind of summarizing the point I'm trying to make is that you know, so we are professionals. We try and engage with some local NGOs as well to bring them in the discussion or you know, as a thought partner on some of these issues. लेकिन in business organizations को भी तो कहते हैं हमें इसका business benefit क्या मिलेगा अगर हम ये सब कुछ करेंगे. ठीक है, organizational development के perspective से हम कर रहे हैं कि ये हो जाए. Okay, the second thing is हम brand की जो requirement थी उसको हम meet कर रहे हैं. But as a business organization, what benefit does it bring us?
Well, see, this is an excellent question, because that's what one of the things you're working on, because most of your, you know, your textiles, so textiles are based on exports, right?
Yes.
We are working on it from the export angle, is like, how are we setting standards for companies and their supply chain for the ultimate consumer, which is generally US, Western Europe, China. China, the choro, China, we can't do anything. They don't listen, right? But these places, what are the sustainability campaigns that you do? How you create awareness of like, what is the supply chain and what are the practices of companies that are supplying the cotton or the textile that is based in your product, right? I'm on the board of some like design companies, and we are looking at, you know, like Kering is one of them, and they have a lot of brands under them.
Yes, they have.
Look, yeah. So I advise them on how to create, and we launched a big campaign, Shine for Change, which is under the Gucci brand, and it's really looking on how these brands can actually elevate women and girls' rights. And part of it is their own supply chain, their own hiring practices, and then who are they contacting with. So from the international perspective, you can give this kind of motivation to suppliers in Pakistan that big brands are not going to buy from you because your supply chains are tainted, or you don't have enough women in the workplace. Or there's another person on the Kering board who is working with me on creating a list of how many, the board representation of women of all the companies, and you're starting them, and those companies are the key companies to do business with. So it's a little at a time. And the other part that I was trying to work on is working with pension funds here, like what countries do they invest in? And so far we don't have a list of companies where we have measurement of how they treat women and how they treat sexual harassment, how many women are there. But if once we create that, that can also be, because ultimately the drivers of change are internationally who's getting your product and do they want your product? And, you know, so that's one of the things we are trying to influence from here. And I hear your pain, Noreen, about like all the stuff, because all sexual harassment policies are very easy to write down and they're very hard to implement. And I have noticed in most companies that work on sexual harassment, if the guy is higher up than the woman, which they usually are, the woman ends up being out of the company and the guy ends up being transferred or even promoted, you know? And so we are working, we are looking at these cases and figuring out what to do, you know? So I don't know, this is a very long question. I would love to have a conversation with you later, but I do see that we are out of time for now, no, Nazia?
Absolutely. So, जाने से पहले भी take one observation. One of our friends, Dr. Taj, said to have a significant impact on the topic, along with women, majority Pakistani men need to be educated as well, which we all agree. It's not just us women. But last question, Yasmin, and I promised you 1 hour, but it's a minute over. What do you think is the most stressful part of your job? I mean, you work so hard. So what do you find most stressful?
You know, right now, the most stressful part of my job, like there are different times I have different stressful parts, right? Initially, it was like, my goal is to bring women all around the world together based on our common issues and connect them. So basically it wasn't, we were never supposed to be an organization that's saying, okay, देखो global south में FGM हो रहा है, child marriage हो रहा है, हम like, so we would do equal work on like sexual assault in the US military and sexualization of girls in Europe, as you know, so that was a struggle, but we got there. And right now, I think that the women's rights movement is getting fractured based on a lot of young people coming in and having a very different idea about stuff. So you're seeing it even when we had over here the protest Black Lives Matter. And to me, it's very important that women band together and agree. And there's a lot of disagreement based on race, ethnicity, and all that. And you've seen in the US, a lot of global women's rights organizations have come down because the heads are white and they have been. So that is, to me, is a struggle, because to me, we are fighting a bigger thing. Like we have Bolsonaro in Brazil, we have Modi in India, we have Donald Trump, Shukar, and not any all these leaders who are like apes thumping on their chests, and they are like very anti-women's equality. So we have a whole world to fight against. And we have our own in Pakistan also the issues. But if women start fighting with each other and creating like ye to nahi theek, or meri ye, that's a big problem. And I'm trying to figure out how to unite people rather than divide them, so we can see what is our common cause that we can all work towards. So,
Thank you very much, Yasmin.
Yes.
Extremely enlightening, informative topic, and I'm sure all of us really enjoyed it, and it's going to impact many. Thank you very much, and continue doing what you're doing and keep on shining. You make us all very proud.
Thanks for having me. And it's lovely to have so many old friends on here. Thank you so much. I hope we can all get together in person soon.
Inshallah.
Lovely to see you again, Yasmin. Take care of
Lovely
yourself.
to
Thank you,
hear
Nazia.
you
for
all. I
joining
didn't
us.
see you.
Welcome to you soon. Khuda Hafiz.
Bye.
Bye-bye.